Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Bahá'í Chat. We're so happy to have you all here with us today. We see lots of folks coming into the chat room. Bahá'í Chat is a conversation series dedicated to our interconnectedness. It's an uplifting moment when we can turn our thoughts to spiritual ideas. Each weekly session is rooted in the Bahá'í Writings and the fundamental teachings of the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of mankind, led by individuals putting these principles into action. The Bahá'í Faith is the youngest of the independent world religions, having been born in Iran in 1844. Its prophet founder, Baha'u'llah, a title meaning the glory of God, spent 40 years in prison and endured 4 successive exiles. Baha'is believe that religion is progressive. Each of the major world religions are actually part of one unfolding progressive revelation whereby mankind has been moved forward from one level of unity to the next. Baha'u'llah refers to the messengers that have established the world's religion sent by God over the centuries as divine physicians. He tells us that the teachings of these divine educators, while essentially and fundamentally the same in spirit, have varied due to the needs of the people which have evolved from age to age. This is what he wrote. The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in its unerring wisdom the remedy. The remedy the world needeth in its present day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned, he tells us, with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. Again, the most fundamental teaching of the Bahá'í Faith is the oneness of mankind. We're living in that long-awaited day of God when the peoples of the world, whatever race, whatever ethnic background, from whatever religious faith tradition or nation or culture, will finally be united as one family. But the obstacles to achieving this monumental, this unprecedented goal are many, and the manifestations of those obstacles vary from place to place. Here in the United States, we face what Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Bahá'í Faith and great-grandson of the Prophet Baha'u'llah, refers to in his Advent of Divine Justice as America's most vital and challenging issue: the staggering effects of racism that have infected this country from its earliest inception. We see those effects daily now on virtually every level. In this regard, the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States recently wrote a message addressed to the American people. I'd like to share part of this open letter and post a link to the entire letter in the chat box. The Baha'is of the United States join our fellow citizens in heartfelt grief at the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others whose lives were suddenly taken by appalling acts of violence. These heartbreaking violations against fellow human beings, due only to the color of their skin, have deepened the dismay caused by a pandemic whose consequences to the health and livelihoods of people of color have been disproportionately severe. This has come to pass against a backdrop of long-standing racial injustice in virtually every aspect of American life. It's clear that racial prejudice is the most vital and challenging issue we face as a country. Yet amidst these tragedies, there are also signs of hope. Countless citizens have arisen to proclaim the truth that we are one nation, to demand specific actions to address the pervasive inequities that for too long have shaped our society. We have remembered who we aspire to be as a people, and we are determined to make a change for the better. This moment beckons us to a renewed commitment to realize the ideal of e pluribus unum, out of many one, the very ideal upon which America was founded. To create a just society begins with a recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But it's not enough simply to believe this in our hearts. It creates the moral imperative to act, to view all aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. It implies a reordering of our society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. And it requires the participation of Americans of every race, every background, for it is only through such inclusive participation that new moral and social directions can emerge. Again, the link to this document is available in the chat box, the bottom of your screen. Today's topic is Unpacking Materialism, Becoming a True Friend. And we are really delighted to welcome today's guest, Penn Badgley. Penn is an American actor known for playing Dan Humphrey in the television series Gossip Girl, and more recently as Joe Goldberg in the Netflix series You. Introduced in 2007 to the excess of American celebrity culture at 20 years of age, spiritual search soon became a priority for Penn. Spurred on by a desire for personal and social transformation, Penn traveled in 2011 to the rainforests of Colombia, where learning from the Koji tribe, he discovered the Baha'i faith. Penn, welcome to Baha'i Chat.
Hey, can you see and hear me?
You're on. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that welcome. You know, I think just for reference for anybody listening, I think it is the Kogi tribe. Of course, how they actually pronounce that, maybe a bit different from that. But yeah, thank you so much. You know, I was really trying to close my eyes and listen to those words you shared from both Baha'u'llah, the founder of our faith, the proponent of the Baha'i teachings, exponent of the Baha'i teachings, I should say, and then listening to a proponent of the Baha'i teachings, our National Spiritual Assembly, and these words about the long-standing systemic divide between the races in our world, but particularly in our country. And my heart is both heavy, but I feel a coursing, a surging joy, maybe. Joy is an intense word. Maybe it's an anxiousness, you know, to arise to the time and the occasion. So again, thank you everybody for joining. This idea that I can talk about materialism, first of all, I'm not an authority. I'm not a trained educator by any means. So bear with me. This is actually the first time I have tried to present this kind of working thesis of my own interest and relating it to what's happening now. So if we can just take a moment, regardless of how we identify, Baha'i or Christian or Buddhist or atheist or humanist, whatever it might be, what is your, just think with me, what is your highest ideal or idea about human nature? What do you think about the quality of the human spirit? What does that mean to you? So if I can ask, just take a moment, think about your highest ideal of the human spirit, of what that means. There's no wrong answer, of course. It's aspirational, just your hopes and dreams. Right? So feel that. And actually, to elevate that even more, Josefina, can you bring up the first slide? I'll take a read here if you want to read along. O Son of Spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. This was written by Baha'u'llah. Okay, so that's an example of human nature, right? And to elevate it even more, we don't just want to think about all this gushy kindness right now, because we need action, and it needs to be based in something as firm and strong as justice, right? So Josefina, can you bring up the next slide, please? O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things, in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid, thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. So if you can't just let that sink in, keep striving in your mind and your heart for your highest image of the human being, the human spirit, the soul. And then think about the last text message you sent, maybe, or even for me, not at all to make ourselves feel bad, but what do we see out in the world? What do we see at work? What do we see in our homes? What do we, at our most honest and vulnerable moments, see in our own hearts? And how much does that align with these ideas that we were just meditating on about the human spirit? So the difference to me between how we felt when we heard those passages and we searched our hearts, the difference between that and how we just felt when we considered, what some might call the reality out there, the reality in here, that is materialism to me. That is the way that I understand the Bahá'í Writings referencing materialism. It does not only have to do with consumer culture or capitalist culture. It is actually something quite distinct and quite broad, and it has far, far, far reaching implications. So in a way, materialism, it's that sinking feeling that anyone may have just had, like thinking about this juxtaposition of how high we might believe we want to go and how low and sometimes we feel. That to me is a knowing, a realization that we're immersed in something that doesn't align with how we actually feel about ourselves or each other. There's a great sort of like sometimes it's a joke, sometimes it's a proverb, sometimes it's a story, but effectively, let's say there are these two fish, these two young little fish, youthful, rebellious teenage fish. They're really cool. They're talking to one another, they're swimming along, and this old, radiant, wizened elder fish swims by slowly, patiently, and they sort of quiet down as she comes by. They know her, but not well. She looks at them and says, "Top of the morning, boys. How's the water?" Keep swimming. After she's out of sight, the two fish look at each other, and one says, "What the hell is water?" So that is, to me, the depth to which the laws of our culture, which is ultimately materialistic, they're ingrained in us. And if you think about what it took for that fish to learn about this reality, you have to be removed from the water. And how is a fish removed from the water but by hooks and nets and storms? And how perilous it might be, how painful it is in a moment, but what it teaches you. So if we can bring up the next slide, please. This is a definition of materialism. A tendency to consider material possessions and physical comfort as more important than spiritual values. And two, the doctrine that nothing exists except matter and its movements and modifications. So the first one is it's a tendency, right? And the second one is a doctrine. So the first one, I think, applies to us all. I feel, if we're really honest with ourselves, we are materialists first, struggling to be anything else, whether it's Baha'i or Buddhist or atheist or Christian or scientist, whatever. We are all materialists struggling to be something else, and that's the age we're in. We're in the formative age. It's appropriate. So two, the second part, again, that is actually, it's a belief. It's a belief system. It's not necessarily a scientific belief. I think a scientific belief might be a bit of a paradox. Science has not proved that nothing exists except matter, or its movements, or its modifications. So it's a philosophy, and as long as we regard it as such, I think we're okay. And anybody who wants to pursue that philosophy, it's up to them. But it's really this first part of materialism that I think is so insidious that we're trying to consider today. And you might wonder what business I have talking about it. It's not because I have learned how to overcome it successfully. It's because I feel like I've gotten a pretty interesting, like a first row seat to the fireworks that materialism promises, our culture promises. So anybody who's not aware, I'm an actor, and I was on these shows, as David introduced. So my experience has been, I started to investigate the Baha'i teachings at about 24 years old, as David said, because although we all know money can't buy you love, it can't buy you happiness, we don't really seem to behave in a way that's aligned with that idea, right? I mean, we strive for it, and it's not always a bad thing. You need means, you need spiritual and material well-being, right, and prosperity. But obviously, some of it might be outsized and disproportionate in our culture. So I didn't grow up with a lot of money, but I came into it in my 20s, and that was a very interesting experience because it was also attended by a lot of fame, which is a cultural capital, and of all places, New York City, right? So by the time I was about 22, I think, or 23, in 2010, there was the BP oil spill, and this was a moment. This was the first moment, I think, since the first 2 seasons of the show, that something was able to interrupt the momentum that whether or not I wanted was necessarily, just sweeping me along in my life. It's like when you're working on a show like that, you're often working 5 days a week, something like 10 to 16 hours a day in a sound stage or on location. You're often doing photo shoots on the weekends. It's extremely fast paced. And because you're doing it in New York City and you're 21, 22 years old, you're seeing your face on billboards. It's a surreal experience, and I don't think that anybody could claim to be unswayed by it, unpersuaded by it, unseduced by this kind of experience. I think I had a level enough head on my shoulders that I knew I would have to be careful. But nonetheless, at the least, it was distracting. It was very distracting. So it was something like the BP oil spill, again in 2010, which caused me to recall, yeah, I've been a bit distracted. How are we going to address these needs? And what does it have to do with my personal transformation, right? And those of us who do identify as Baha'is, I mean, we have an entire framework for action where we apply a process of both personal and social transformation in our lives. It's what we're trying to do. It's what we're learning about. So what I did is I looked backward. I should say I looked to the past. I looked to history. I looked to the margins of society for answers. At that point, I think safe to say, I was probably quite skeptical of popular resources, news channels, this sort of thing. So in seeking truth, I really value the wisdom of indigenous cultures. Of course, finding an authentic resource for that wisdom is not easy, and it's significant. The erasure of American Indian history the revision of their history is so almost complete, that it's hard, to find authentic access to that knowledge. How else could you do it really but by friendship? And I think if I want to just the shortcut to this whole thesis that I'm working on, and which is totally, it's not mine, it's coming from my own study of the Baha'i teachings, is that the antidote to materialism is friendship. I even wonder if a solid answer to all of the world's problems is friendship. If you consider what is an answer to racism, friendship. It's not all we need. We need a lot else, but it's the foundation of an effective dismantling and, eradication of it is through authentic friendships, as might be all forms of systemic injustice. I think part of what my experience has led me to reflect on is, I think, the authenticity of the relationships that I was building in my life at that time. Some of the tropes that you see of in a show like, say, Entourage, it's not at all that extreme. At least my experience was never anything close to that. But at least the dimension of publicists and agents and people who I love my representatives. At the same time, there's you can understand that you can feel a bit used and exploited and objectified being an actor in Hollywood, as we call it. So I think dare I say, it was a dearth. It was a lack of authentic relationships that spurred me to investigate spiritually. I think furthermore, it was my constant portrayal of people who struggled to have authentic relationships, friendship or romantic, which caused me to think about this all the time. What are these models that we see in our society mostly of a friendship? What does a friendship look like? What does a romantic relationship look like? How do they start? How do they end? What do we see in between? It's a lot of contention. It's a lot of conflict. And my working understanding of the Bahá'í Writings is that this is one of the fundamental flaws from which all of our other injustices come from in our society, is that we believe that the human being is essentially a greedy, aggressive, contentious, conflict-oriented being, right? But how does that correspond to those writings that we first considered? O son of spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. And then think about, Gossip Girl. I don't mean to, look, to each his own, to each your own, but what are the kind of relationships we see? What is just think to yourself again for a second. This is a little exercise I'm trying to go through. What's your favorite show? What's your favorite book? What's your favorite movie? Why? The attention to detail and the production value we put into popular culture, American media, is so high that basically you can put anything on camera and make it look really exciting. And what draws us into these but a very high level of stakes, which is created by infirm relationships. Often, backbiting, gossip is like the foundation of this show that I've been on in the past. And it's also, I think, the foundation of, unfortunately, I think it's the foundation of a lot of relationships in modern culture because of our materialistic ideals, right? So I also wanna take a moment to clarify, when we're talking about materialism, we as Baha'is believe in the harmony of science and religion, that they're essentially two systems exploring the same reality, and we need both. Science without religion is abject materialism, And religion without science is superstition, right? And I also want to clarify the difference between materialism and material progress or material well-being, because we want material progress. We want material well-being as we want spiritual progress and spiritual well-being. So to me, I think material progress means that as a society that we are able to enjoy and benefit from said progress, which means every member of every group of society would see that progress, would experience it. And also, I think needs to be able to contribute to that material progress. So I would say that we do not live in a greatly materially progressed society more than we live in a materialistic society, where we have a lot of material and technological innovation as opposed to real progress. So to me, again, the difference between material progress and materialism is, let's say, material progress is the average life expectancy increasing due to medical and scientific advances, right? Average life expectancy increased. That's material progress. And that's real. We have that. We have seen that over the centuries. However, materialism is that one group's life expectancy being considerably longer than another group's due to social and environmental factors, right? So you see the difference. I have a stat here. In 1999, the difference in life expectancy between the white and black populations was 5.9 years. The gap decreased to 3.6 years in 2013. So we see there is both material progress, but materialism persists. Material progress is, now during this coronavirus pandemic, material progress is witnessing lives being saved by ventilators, or the spread of the virus being limited by mass production of masks. So we do have that. However, materialism is the withholding and stockpiling of masks and ventilators in warehouses for a number of reasons, which all can be traced ultimately to economic factors, to money, right? So that's the difference between material progress and materialism. And so you see how insidious materialism is and how important it is for us to identify its effect in virtually every aspect of life. My working understanding, and I'm no authority here. I'm not a formal educator with any kind of degree, so definitely do your own thinking, do your own reflecting. But it's my understanding that racism is a facet of materialism, and I think often we wouldn't put it that way. I would look to a lot of other educators to expound on that, right? But that is my understanding at this point. So again, I think it's like, particularly for those of us who are familiar with the Bahá'í Writings, I think we're probably very familiar with how we strive and fall short of the standard that we know is there for a reason, right? Again, I'm recalling those first and second slides. I'm at a stage right now where I'm waking up every day often and reciting those in my mind. They're easy to remember. I often go to bed, those hopefully being the last thing I've recited, rather than the first and last thing I do is look at my phone. Is this enough? No, not even close, not even remotely. It's a sign that I am striving, and it's often a reminder of how much I'm falling short. And so again, I return to this idea of friendship, which actually David touched on in the beginning. And by the way, forgive me if I'm bouncing all around here. It makes some sense in my mind. I hope it does in yours. That the working antidote to this poison of materialism. Oh, that reminds me. Before I go into that, why don't we go into just how maybe insidious some of this might be? A quote from Shoghi Effendi. I think it's the next slide. Yeah, there we go. This is a heavy one. Get ready. the gross materialism that engulfs the entire nation at the present hour. He wrote this in 1956. The attachment to worldly things that enshrouds the souls of men, the fears and anxieties that distract their minds, the pleasure and dissipations that fill their time, the prejudices and animosities that darken their outlook, the apathy and lethargy that paralyze their spiritual faculties. These are among the formidable obstacles that face us, right? So again, that's quite severe. What do we do? Actually, bring up the last slide. I think this is an indication of what we do. So this is from Baha'u'llah. A touch of moisture sufficeth to dissolve the hardened clay out of which this perverse generation is molded. The mere act of your gathering together is enough to scatter the forces of these vain and worthless people. So there's a couple things. A touch of moisture sufficeth. So in the face of all of these perils, Baha'u'llah, no less than the manifestation of God for this day, the universal manifestation of God for this day, is telling us a fact of reality, of our spiritual reality. A touch of moisture sufficeth to dissolve the hardened clay out of which this perverse generation is molded. So, we're as far as my understanding of this, what I'm interpreting, I mean, of course, I encourage you to really, really deepen yourself and have your own. But it means that we're all molded out of this hardened clay. When he says these vain and worthless people, I mean, I think there's a version of this where, he's not talking about other people. He's talking about us. He's talking about us if we are not moistened with this water. And I think the metaphor, the allegory of water throughout all the dispensations of God, throughout all the religions, is knowledge of God. You could think of it as the word of God. Whatever scriptures move you, this is that moisture. A touch of that moisture suffices to dissolve the hardened clay. But then the second part is the mere act of your gathering together. So we must gather, and I think this is a lot more than congregating for religious ceremony or something like that. I mean, in the Baha'i faith, we don't have congregations, we don't have clergy, we don't. So there's a lot else there. But this is, to me, this is action. This is the kind of action we're talking about. So I'm actually going to refer to the letter that David was quoting in the beginning. I've also been studying. It's a really beautiful statement from the National Spiritual Assembly. And right at the bottom of the first page, they say something that I think indicates to us the level of friendship that we're talking about. That is this touch of moisture that sufficeth. It is written, it is essential for us to join hands in a process of learning how to create models of what we want to see in every dimension of American life, as we learn to apply the principle of oneness through practical engagement and experience. So this idea that friendship is the learning ground, it's the building ground, it's the training grounds for how to deal with every single ill we're facing. It's, and I really wish that I was on a panel with other faces right now and other voices so that this could be supported and clarified and debated with other perspectives and other bodies, other expertise, other people with expertise. But my working understanding at this point is that we need two kinds of action, right? It is spiritual material, it is changing hearts and minds, and it is policy. It's the systems that are built as a result of the changed minds and hearts. I think that we have seen in history that you can change policies which have an effect. However, if minds and hearts have not been influenced, racism will continue to find a way. It will. So again, it is essential for us to join hands in a process of learning how to create models of what we want to see in every dimension of American life. Again, I think the bedrock for that kind of action is friendship. And what happens in friendship at the beginning, but conversations, meaningful conversations, which then lead to action. And those of us who do identify as Baha'is, are studying the guidance from the Universal House of Justice and our various institutions, as well as the central figures of our faith. We're familiar with these ideas, but none of us could claim, not one of us ever could claim to be close enough to it, to have internalized it enough. And so this is what we're engaging in, I think, now more than ever. But the key is that we need to think of all people as those friends, not just Baha'is, of course. We've never tried to be an insular community, as though I know I've been a Baha'i for 5 years, but this is what I'm learning, right? So that what we're learning, which might be a unique lesson, we can share with others, but also others are learning unique lessons, which we want to be shared with us. There is no actual us and them. It's just hopefully concentric circles of friendship, which are always expanding. To this end, it is said later. It's in the same statement, just in the next paragraph. It is the recognition that everyone in this land has a part to play in contributing to the betterment of society, and that true prosperity, material and spiritual, will be available to us all to the degree that we live up to this standard. We should earnestly discover what is being done, what truly helps to make a difference, and why. I think that's a key sentence. I'm going to read it again. We should earnestly discover what is being done, what truly helps to make a difference, and why. Now, I feel like that is a really universal statement that has deep implications for every person, every group of people, every community. I think, especially for Baha'is, it is a reminder. What is being done? By Baha'is? No, by people. We are all God's children. There is one God. There's one eternal, changeless faith of God throughout all the religious dispensations. There's one people. Like, what is being done? What truly helps make a difference, and why? We need to learn this. And then it says, I think very interestingly, we should share this knowledge throughout the country as a means of inspiring and assisting the work of others. If we do this, we could soon find ourselves in the midst of a mass transition toward racial justice. I mean, like, can you even imagine what that would be like? It means we all have a lot of work to do. It means Baha'is have to learn what's being learned elsewhere. And hopefully, I mean, if we're doing anything as Baha'is, we should have something unique also to offer others. But how can this be offered but through friendship? And again, how much are we fighting the lessons we've learned since birth from watching countless movies, TV shows, reading books, whatever it is, that do not encourage us to have this level of integrity in our relationships, this level of authenticity, this level of reflection, this level, I mean, like this kind of unconditional love. It's a lot, right? I would love to answer some questions. I think maybe David, if you want to pop in, or Josefina, if you want to share some questions from the group.
Here's a question for you. You talked about traveling in 2011 in your spiritual search and seeking out, I don't want to mispronounce this again, the Kogi, yeah, the Kogi tribe, and really feeling an affinity for Indigenous people. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, I mean, so I met a Baha'i there, and the experience I had there was I started to realize how much even this quasi or pseudo spiritual pursuit of Indigenous American knowledge is, it's like there's, how to put it, I'm trying to put it delicately. It's like I started to realize as I was developing true relationships with our liaison there, who was a Colombian man, Colombian born and bred. He was always going to be near and dear to my heart. He was very close with this tribe. And then he and I became very close. And as I learned from him, because a lot of the Kogi don't even speak, they don't speak English, but some of them don't speak Spanish. They speak their own language. It's the largest intact pre-Columbian civilization, and they have a deep sort of body of spiritual wisdom and knowledge. And I think we have a lot to learn from them. started to realize, however, that I didn't know what it would mean to have an authentic relationship to this particular body of knowledge. You know, if I'm using their rituals and my prayers and my meditations, what implications does that have? I felt like there needs to be universal access to this divine reality for all people. You know, we can't be expected to fly to South America. You know, we can't, you know, the amount of money that I was spending at that point traveling the world seeking was, you know, wasn't like all the wealth in the world, but it was like, not everybody has that. Not everybody has, like, is that a barrier? I think I started to realize like the privilege of my own pursuit. And I was thankful for that opportunity, but I knew that it shouldn't be required. Only purity of heart, the ardent desire for truth should be a requisite, right? And so as I started to learn more about the Baha'i teachings from the Baha'i that I met in Colombia, something about that started to really resonate. It should be said as well that like the way that a lot of indigenous communities around the world have internalized and wholeheartedly accepted Baha'u'llah's teachings and become, I think, in many ways, beacons of the Baha'i faith. It's significant, you know? So yeah, so I mean, I think my exploration for some time was always that spiritual truth is something from the past, something from, again, the margins of society, something that was always out there and I would find from someone else. And well, the truth is that what really allowed Baha'u'llah's writings to pierce my heart was going through a quite difficult personal time, you know, for all those intimate reasons that we have, you know, something that would make a good episode on Gossip Girl or something like
I have another question for you. This is kind of an interesting question. What is the relationship between silence and friendship? When this person is saying, Ray Hudson says, when living in an Alaska native village for many years, he learned that silence takes great effort for him, but produces great results. Any thoughts or ideas about that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's definitely a relationship. I feel like he might have more to say about that than I do. I think silence has a great role to play. You know, we think about the tension between, you know, a very popular sort of philosophy right now, which is very rightfully so becoming popular, and is that silence is complicity, silence is complacency, silence is violence. When we see it from groups of people in response to systemic oppression. However, also, in order to listen, you need to be silent. Truly to listen. And what could possibly be the foundation of a friendship other than that kind of listening, that kind of silence? So I think silence is a really dynamic activity in a way. I mean, think about, we say rising to action. What role does silence play in that? Think about a radical divine silence, a potent active silence. You know, I want to clarify that I'm not suggesting like just be silent, you know, like don't be vocal about what you think is right, all this stuff. But I mean, I think it's a great question. I would love to spend hours consulting and meditating on that one.
What do you personally think is the one thing we could do now to push ourselves toward this spiritual height you were talking about? For some of us, we're integrated in this corporate landscape, and it seems like the only way to move forward is to succumb to these materialistic tendencies.
Yeah.
What do we do to push forward?
To push forward. Yeah. What do I know? Well, I mean, again, I think for Baha'is, we do have a framework of action for that. Like it's dynamic, it's complex. None of us understand it well enough. Otherwise, we'd be, I'd be able to explain it better. It seems to me that as it pertains to this talk I think that I think active friendships where everyone concerned, where all the members of a community or the members of a group of people, who are in friendship, if everyone is concerned both for their own personal transformation and the transformation of others in their community, so it's like, it's this twofold moral purpose of personal and social transformation being intimately wed together. And what does it mean to sort of systematically work with that kind of change in mind? I think those of us in corporate culture believe that you can elevate conversations in your workplace. I I need to remember that as often too, but like, believe in the capacity of human. You might not believe in the capacity of your corporation to change its culture, but you have to believe in the capacity for the individuals who comprise that corporation to change, because they are human beings with souls created by God, just as you. I think that is like the thing that we can work on. I know I can have to work on that, sometimes the contempt I can have for the sort of standards of my own industry. I think that's how we battle through it. It's like, believe in their souls, believe in your soul.
Are you challenged with talking about spirituality and religion with your peers and colleagues in the acting profession, and what works?
I have to say, I don't find a challenge personally. I find the greatest challenge publicly, because, for instance, here, which is so strange, is like, I can't see faces. It's like, you can't, it's such a different medium to do this in this way and to do it so publicly. But no, I mean, I think what I'm really interested in doing is building that capacity to have those conversations with people in professional spaces. And I think, like, it's always about finding that point of unity. That, okay, maybe we can't agree on, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglected not that I may confide in thee. Maybe like sharing that right away is like, well, what? But if we focus on the essential principles, like, what are the things that this person you're talking to, and listening to, hopefully, what is something that you can agree on? Start there. And then I think, trusting in God, trusting in the capacity of all people to transform and change and progress, because it is actually the natural state of all things. There's something there. I feel like, again, it's kind of hard to expound on that without a conversation, which is sort of part and parcel of this whole thing. But that's what's coming to mind.
Well, this one is aligned a little bit with that. What do we do about so many of our relationships, including friendships, being organized around materialistic pursuits? It almost seems like we don't know how to function socially without materialism intermediating our interactions. And as I was reading it, I was just thinking about this amazing process that's going on throughout the Baha'i world, where Baha'is are making friends and connections with others, folks of all religions and perhaps no faith, and engaged in community building activities.
Well, okay, so part of what I started thinking of, like, if I have any kind of experience or expertise, I've been working in my industry for a very long time, so I don't know what value that expertise has, but I think I have it, right? I've been doing it for 23 years, actually at a professional level. So I think what that gives me is, I have been consistently engaging with the material that Hollywood is creating to share with the world. These are the sorts of relationships, these are the sorts of stories that we seem to be most interested in telling, or at least these are the stories that become most popular. They're the ones that are produced, and there's a lot there because Hollywood is a very small group of people. It's historically, of course, been mostly male, mostly white. Continues to this day. It's changing, but it's not enough, right? Like, so part of the problem is that our storytelling centers are not at all decentralized. It's like this one group of people telling stories for the rest of the world. To me, I think that has a much deeper and insidious effect than we often would give it credit for. I think the fact that we grew up watching something like Disney movies then we graduate to CW series, and then we graduate to Netflix and HBO series, which all, there's a through line there. And a through line I don't think is it the nobility of the human being? Is it the inherent dignity of the human soul? Is it its capacity for justice and transformation? What are the through lines that we see in those stories? You know, I won't answer that question for you, but I think we probably all know that it's in some ways not helpful. How often do we see healthy relationships modeled for us? And then I think the question is like, how much of our time do we spend watching watching a screen? How much of our time do we spend engaging with all that kind of information? And how much time, if we're Baha'i, do we spend engaging with the writings? Like, what's the proportion, you know? And I think we can't kid ourselves that we're not really Baha'i, we're not really Christian, we're not really we're predominantly, probably at any given point in time, materialists, you know, struggling to be something else, as I said. So did that get towards an answer for the question?
Someone was asking how to learn more about the Baha'i faith. I don't know if you want to talk to that, or you have some thoughts about it.
So, I mean, one thing you can do right here is that you can, how does someone access this guide program that you've got going, David?
Well, just send Josefina will post that. Just send an email to info@baha'i.chat with the word guide in the subject line, and we'll connect you with someone. But also, you know, you can Google search the Baha'i faith.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Things are going on really all over the country, and get connected that way as well. Here's a question. You're talking about becoming a true friend. How does one go about doing that?
If I haven't gotten any closer in this talk, I don't know that I'll get any closer in this answer. Well, actually, I want to go back to that question earlier about silence and friendship, about listening. I don't think that we in America have probably developed this capacity anywhere near to the degree that is required for personal and social transformation. Again, where I try to take responsibility for that from my experience as an actor is like, I see the kind of storytelling that we're engaged in mostly is like, it's a lot of talking heads, it's a lot of drama, it's a lot of contention and conflict, and we don't see true friendships modeled. How often do you see somebody just like not speaking in a television show? Like how often do you watch people listen? I mean, the irony is that right now in my television show, you do see a lot of that, but you're hearing him think, so it's not really quiet. It's not, he's actually speaking to himself. The funny thing is that with my show now, I am constantly shooting scenes where I have like maybe one line. So you do watch a lot of my face without me talking, but I don't think it's quite the same thing. I think it does have to do with listening. It has to do with listening, compassion, finding what the other person is, what motivates them, what are they really thinking about? Because I think what Baha'u'llah tells us about the human being is that everybody actually does have the desire to contribute to the betterment of the world around them. They may have been so indoctrinated by these other ideas of other ways of being that desire is atrophied and it's latent. It's not clear to you, but I think where we build up each other and empower each other and encourage each other is in discovering each other's desires, you know, each other's noblest desires, each other's most altruistic desires. And again, what does materialism do but sort of relegate us to our basest desires? Like, I want this thing, I want to get that thing, I want to have sex with that person, I want to drink that thing. I mean, the funny thing is we have this idea that it's like this really long, awesome, multicolored spectrum of all this fun, you know, stuff, but the list is short. It's like, you know, sex, alcohol, drugs, gossip. What else you got? Murder. What else you got? What else do we see on all these networks and these TV shows? There's actually not that much variety.
Well, we're approaching the hour point here, but before we sign off and make a couple of announcements, you have a friend on the way. Next
Friend,
month,
yeah.
next month, you and
Yeah.
your lovely wife Domino are going to have your first child. You're excited, I'm sure.
I am. I'm beyond excited. I don't even know. I mean, so I have a stepson, and I know something of parenthood, but not what it is to be there from the first moment. And whew, yeah. Well, I can't. Yeah. I'm just so excited to be that in love. I am so excited to meet a new soul and to find out what he thinks in time. Like I'm really excited.
Is it a boy or a girl? Do you know?
It's a
Or
boy,
you?
yeah, a
Oh,
boy.
and when is he coming?
Just about a month from today. Yeah.
Well, that's great.
I mean, due dates are like, what do you? I was 2 months early.
Well, that's not going to happen here. So,
Yeah.
so congratulations on that, and thank you so much for joining us today.
I mean, hey, thanks for putting up with my ideas.
We enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone did. And we'd like to just invite everyone again next week. We actually have a special program, a special 4th of July, because Saturday this year falls on the 4th of July. The topic is dismantling racism, prerequisite to America's spiritual destiny. We will have Dr. Layli Maparian. She is the Catherine Stone Kaufman 67 Executive Director of the Wellesley Center for Women and Professor and Chair of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. She's served as a Fulbright Specialist at the University of Liberia, as well as a Contemplative Practice Fellow of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, and she currently sits on the Board of Directors of the Global Fund for Women. Her most recent scholarship engages womanism, African worldview, and the Baha'i faith in dialogue around solving the most vital and challenging issue, the eradication of racial prejudice, and advancing the Baha'i faith's clear mandates for racial amity, racial unity, racial justice, and ultimately the oneness of mankind. She's going to be joined by a wonderful multidisciplinary artist and actor. He's a writer as well, Masood Olafani, who has written and will perform a dramatic monologue on Frederick Douglass. So we think that will be a very appropriate program for the 4th of July. We can ask the question, when will we really have independence? Thank you again, Penn, for being here today, and to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.